Okay, let's unpack this. You know that feeling, right? That deep exhaustion, even when you're pouring your absolute best into something that truly matters. Maybe it's demanding work, could be raising a family, a mission you believe in with everything you have.
Yeah.
You have the best intentions, you're working incredibly hard, but somehow you still feel, well, empty, spiritually dry. It's this really unsettling paradox.
Yeah.
Giving so much, yet your own well feels low.
It's a remarkably common experience, especially among people who are really deeply committed to serving others, whether that's in like obvious ministry roles or just demanding jobs.
Right.
There's this profound desire for lasting impact, for spiritual vitality.
Right.
But the very pressures of the work itself could just deplete you.
Exactly. And our go-to response is often to try harder, isn't it? More hours, maybe new strategy, find some productivity hack.
Sure, double down.
Yeah. But what if the key isn't more effort in the same direction? What if the solution suggested by the sources we're diving into today is something entirely different?
Yeah. This deep dive draws from a collection of perspectives that explore a potentially transformative principle. The idea of cultivating a worshipful heart.
Okay.
They argue this isn't just like a helpful spiritual discipline alongside your work, but something absolutely foundational for both your effectiveness and, frankly, your own spiritual survival.
So our mission in this deep dive, then, is to pull out the crucial insights from these sources to understand why worship is bedrock, not just a bonus, and maybe more importantly, practical ways you can cultivate this kind of heart, whatever your daily mission field looks like. Welcome.
Welcome. It's good to be digging into this.
So that feeling of spiritual dryness, where does it actually come from? Our sources seem to point to a subtle but pretty significant danger for dedicated people, even those doing genuinely good work.
They really highlight the risk of kind of subtly substituting activity for God, for genuine communion with God. You're busy doing the work of the kingdom, which is good, it's necessary.
Sure.
But that interconnection, the actually being with the king, it starts to diminish.
So you're serving the mission, but maybe losing that intimacy with the one who actually sent you in the first place.
Precisely. The sources talk about the altar of effectiveness. And this is where we measure success by external things, busy schedules, tasks completed, visible impact.
The metrics.
Yeah, the metrics. And it's so easy for this to subtly replace what one source calls the unseen altar of the heart. That inner space where your deepest devotion and communion are really meant to burn brightest day to day. And when that unseen altar is neglected, the outer work, even if it looks successful, can start to feel performative, kind of hollow.
Whew. That word performative really lands, doesn't it? You can be going through all the motions, looking successful on the outside, but just feeling empty inside.
Yeah.
So when you hit that point of dryness, these sources offer a different path than just do more. What's that surprising solution they're pointing towards?
It's really a radical reorientation. Instead of focusing on increasing effort or, adopting some new strategy, the solution proposed is anchoring your identity and your sense of worth, not primarily in what you do for God, but in who you adore. Basically centering your life on worship.
That's a fundamental shift. It's less about my output and more about my sort of inner gaze, my focus.
Exactly. One source paints this picture. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast mission field, and that could be your challenging workplace, your busy home, your community.
Right, wherever you are.
Wherever you are. You're full of vision, ready to pour yourself out, and yet you feel that unsettling dryness deep in your soul. The insight is, what if the key to transforming that outreach or that difficult conversation, or even just that mundane task, wasn't some new technique, but simply a posture of unbroken worship cultivated within you?
Wow. That image really challenges our kind of conventional wisdom about what truly fuels sustainable effort, doesn't it?
It really does.
It suggests the power source is internal and fundamentally relational.
It shifts the focus entirely. It's about the internal landscape of the heart.
Okay, so let's explore this idea more, that worship isn't just a reaction to success or something you do, after the work is done. The sources make a really strong case that worship is actually the engine, the reason, and the sustaining power for mission and life. How do they explain that?
Yeah, this is perhaps one of the most profound insights they offer. Worship isn't just something that happens because of mission or ministry. It is the very purpose for which mission exists in the first place. And it's the sustaining force in the life of the one who's sent.
So mission exists for worship? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Our sources echo that famous statement, missions exist because worship doesn't. Now, that doesn't mean God is never worshipped, but that He isn't yet worshipped among all peoples of the earth in spirit and truth.
Got it.
Therefore, evangelism and ministry are fundamentally the means by which people are drawn into a place where they can see God's glory and respond in worship.
That connects directly to that picture in Isaiah 66, doesn't it? Verses 18 and 19, where God declares he will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see his glory.
Exactly.
The ultimate goal, the culmination, is people from every corner of the world united in seeing and implicitly worshiping God's glory.
Precisely. And the critical link the sources make is this. If worship is the ultimate goal for the nations, it absolutely must be the essential lifeline and the sustaining power for those called to reach them. You can't effectively lead others to a destination you aren't intimately familiar with yourself, right? Your own connection to the source of worship is paramount.
That makes so much sense. And the sources use that really powerful biblical example, Mary and Martha, to illustrate this very principle.
Yes. From Luke chapter 10, Martha is, she's engaged in necessary and good service hospitality, preparing things, important stuff.
Totally.
But Mary is seated at Jesus' feet, listening, prioritizing being with him. And when Martha gets frustrated, Jesus' affirmation of Mary choosing the better portion isn't like a dismissal of service.
Right. He's not saying service is bad.
Not at all. But it's a vital reordering. It shows that attentive presence, worship, being with Jesus isn't a distraction from service. It's actually the source that empowers and clarifies true service, the doing for him.
So the inner posture really informs the outer action. Worship comes before the work and stops it from becoming just, duty.
It ensures the labor flows from love and adoration, rather than just obligation or maybe even the need for external validation.
Okay. Now, this leads us straight into a common hurdle for, I think, many people, the sacred-secular divide. We often mentally sort life into spiritual things, church, prayer, maybe explicit ministry, and then there's everything else. Work, chores, errands, just normal life, maybe even unspiritual life.
And the sources powerfully challenge that separation. They present this, really radical biblical vision of whole life worship, drawing strongly from Romans 12.1, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is your spiritual worship.
Wow, that's huge. It's not just about what you do with your mind or your spirit in a specific setting, like church on Sunday.
Right.
It's about presenting your entire embodied existence, your hands, your feet, your time as an act of worship.
Exactly. This means every dimension of life, when it's done with intention towards God, becomes an act of worship. Cooking a meal, navigating some complex bureaucracy, learning a difficult language, even, doing the laundry, none of it is outside the realm of spiritual significance.
Like Colossians 3.17 says, right? Whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus.
Giving thanks to God the Father through him. It completely reframes the mundane.
That example from one source about the missionary mother in rural Kenya, that really brings this to life. Her daily reality might involve hours just spent hand-washing laundry. It's hard work.
Grueling, yeah.
But the patience she shows, the faithfulness in that repetition, maybe the quiet prayer while she works, that is also profoundly spiritual. That's worship, just as much as leading a Bible study might be.
It breaks down that false wall completely. And this reorientation becomes absolutely essential in the hard places. Times when the work feels fruitless or the circumstances are bleak. Maybe loneliness is overwhelming.
Yeah, because it's easy to feel grateful and, worshipful when everything is going well, when you see tangible results. But what happens when the soil is hard and nothing seems to be growing?
Right. That's where worship becomes this almost defiant act of faith. Yeah. It's declaring God's worthiness and goodness, not based on your favorable circumstances, but based purely on his unchanging character, even when the outcomes are unseen or frankly disappointing.
Like Habakkuk 3.17-18.
Exactly. That becomes such a powerful anthem. Though the fig tree does not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. That's worship rooted in revelation about who God is, not in results.
It's choosing to anchor your joy in who God is, not just what he is currently doing in your immediate circumstances. That's tough.
It is tough, yes. And the sources use that powerful example of Paul and Silas singing hymns in prison, in Acts 16.
Yeah.
This wasn't some naive optimism.
No way. They were in stocks, beaten.
Exactly. It was a declaration of God's sovereignty and goodness, but it was rooted in a deep relationship they'd cultivated before the crisis hit. Their worship in chains was this act of spiritual warfare, a declaration of allegiance that wasn't dependent on their comfort or their freedom.
And that act of worship, it didn't just lift their spirits, it actually preceded a physical breakthrough, the earthquake, the doors opening, and became this powerful witness to the jailer and his whole household.
It demonstrates that the power of worship in a crisis is often directly linked to its consistency in the quieter non-crisis moments. It's about that inner formation becoming outward expression when tested.
So this all sounds incredibly compelling, this idea of prioritizing worship and seeing all of life through that lens. But okay, how does this actually work on a practical day-to-day level? How do we move from understanding this why to actually implementing the how?
Yeah, that's the crucial transition the sources make. They really emphasize that cultivating this worshipful heart isn't like magic. It's built through intentional daily rhythms and habits. It's about tending that unseen altar we talked about.
Okay, so what are some of those specific practices for personal cultivation that the sources highlight, things people can actually do?
Well, they point to disciplines like silence and solitude, reflecting Psalm 46.10. Be still and know that I am God. In our crazy, overloaded lives, just carving out quiet times simply to be with God without an agenda is so vital for grounding the soul.
And scripture saturation, okay, so not just reading the Bible for information or like to prepare a lesson for somebody else.
Right, which is easy to do.
Yeah, but meditating on it personally, really allowing the word to speak to your own heart, like Psalm 1.2 describes someone delighting in God's law and meditating on it day and night.
Yes, letting it form you. Another key they mention is prayerful awareness, basically practicing the presence of God throughout the day, turning tasks into brief prayers, seeing God in little moments, aiming towards that idea of praying without ceasing from 1 Thessalonians 5.17. It's integrating prayer into the actual flow of life.
And I imagine practices like celebration and gratitude, actively noticing and thanking God for the good things, small or large, like Philippians 4 encourages, are pretty essential to keeping that altar fire burning.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe confession too, like 1 John 1.9 reminds us, regularly clearing anything that might hinder that communion.
Absolutely vital. These aren't meant to be burdensome duties, but ways to keep the channel open, And it also involves intentionally reframing those routine tasks we discussed earlier, seeing laundry not just as a chore, but maybe as a moment of quiet work done for God, a small kind of liturgy.
Or seeing your commute, or even just a walk, as a chance for doxology, for praising God, perhaps with music or just quiet reflection.
Right. Using simple anchors like music, maybe journaling, or even just short pauses can really help integrate this.
And examples like Daniel, consistently praying despite the huge risks in Daniel 6, or David's Psalms, which show his constant wrestling and awareness of God's presence. They demonstrate that this has always been the path of deeply spiritual people.
Right. Exactly. It's about building those patterns. And beyond the personal stuff, the sources also emphasize the importance of team and corporate cultivation. Shared worship is incredibly vital for unity and also for empowering a shared mission. Matthew 18.20 is relevant here.
Yeah.
Jesus says he's present when even just 2 or 3 are gathered in his name.
And Acts 13.2 is such a powerful example of this working in practice. The Holy Spirit spoke and commissioned Paul and Barnabas for their first major mission while the church leaders in Antioch were worshiping and fasting together.
Yeah.
So corporate worship actually became the context for divine direction and sending.
It really highlights that intentional shared spiritual practices within a team, maybe starting meetings with a worshipful reading, or ending planning sessions with a moment of collective surrender and prayer, or creating safe space for authentic vulnerability. These aren't secondary add-ons. They're actually foundational to the health and direction of the group.
The sources also bring up this idea of spiritual vitality checks. What does that look like? Is it like a checklist?
Not quite a checklist. It's more the practice of regular, honest self-assessment, like the psalmist's plea in Psalm 139, "Search me, O God, and know my heart," or Paul's instruction in 2 Corinthians 13 to examine yourselves.
Okay.
It's not about beating yourself up, but just gently and honestly looking at the state of your inner life. Are you experiencing that dryness we talked about?
Yeah.
Is the altar fire burning low?
And like that story of Elijah in 1 Kings 19, where God so tenderly cares for him when he's utterly depleted and discouraged. It suggests it's okay to be honest about the dryness and to actively seek God's renewal, often with the help of others, right?
Exactly. It's about seeking renewal, and it often involves accountability from trusted friends or mentors. And finally, the sources connect all of this to leadership and preventing burnout. They really emphasize humility in leadership, patterned after Christ's servant leadership. Philippians 2, Mark 10.
So seeing yourself as a servant leader, not someone who has to carry the entire burden alone on your shoulders.
Precisely. Burnout is often framed as a symptom of misplaced responsibility.
Yeah.
trying to do God's job, or carrying weights that aren't actually yours to carry, which in turn often stems from under-worship, from not consistently anchoring yourself in God's strength and sufficiency.
Wow.
Worship helps leaders surrender that illusion of control, find true rest, and actually draw on God's infinite resources rather than their own limited human capacity.
And community is such a critical buffer against burnout too, isn't it? Hebrews 10 calls us to stir one another up in love and good works, and importantly, not neglect meeting together. You're just not meant to sustain this alone.
That humble heart that prioritizes worship is both the foundation for true servant leadership and the safeguard against the kind of striving that just leads to exhaustion and spiritual depletion.
Wow. Okay, this has been such a rich exploration. If we try and bring it all together, what's the ultimate outcome, according to these sources, when worship becomes this central permeating force in your life and work?
The sources synthesize it really beautifully. When worship is foundational, ministry, work, daily life, it moves from feeling like a relentless treadmill to becoming sustainable, authentic, and filled with a surprising kind of joy and power. It fundamentally shifts from striving to overflowing.
Ah, that's the difference between burning out and burning bright.
Right, exactly that. The life anchored in worship is described with contrasts like anchored, not anxious, joyful, not driven, faithful, not frenzied. Worship stops being an optional accessory, and becomes the very source, the sustenance, and actually a powerful signal of God's presence at work within you and through you.
And this whole life worship itself becomes a powerful, embodied witness to the world around us. It speaks louder than words sometimes, doesn't it? It can transcend cultural and language barriers because it demonstrates a life integrated around something, well, transcendent. It shows a faith that saturates everything, embodying God's glory in the most mundane moments and also in the most magnificent efforts.
Yeah, one source states it so powerfully. The unseen altar in her heart is not a private luxury. It is a missional necessity.
Wow, a missional necessity. That really elevates the importance of our internal state, doesn't it? It's not just for us.
It underscores that true, sustainable impact flows directly from a heart that is wholly given to God in worship.
So the clear takeaway from this deep dive into these sources really seems to be that the secret to lasting impact and spiritual vitality isn't primarily about doing more or even just doing things differently necessarily, but about being rooted deeply and constantly in worship. It's about letting adoration saturate every single area of your life.
It really calls for a radical internal reorientation, seeing all of life as sacred ground for worship, prioritizing your presence with God over your performance for Him, intentionally building those daily rhythms of connection we talked about, and actively recognizing God's presence and His worthiness in every single moment.
It really challenges that deep-seated impulse I think many of us have to define our lives just by productivity and visible success.
It invites us back to the true source of life and power. It really does.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on this week. Based on everything we've explored in this deep dive, how might intentionally redefining success in your own life or work, not just by your visible output, but by that quiet internal measure of your intimacy and abiding with Christ, how might that fundamentally change how you approach your daily tasks and challenges this week?